Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're diving into a topic that's crucial to life on Earth, but maybe not the most exciting at first glance, plant reproduction.
Right. It's not exactly a thriller movie, but trust me, there are hidden wonders in the world of plant sex that are just as mind-blowing as anything you'd find in nature.
Totally. We're going to focus on the fascinating world of flowering plants, or as scientists call them, angiosperms. And along the way, we'll meet an Indian botanist who dedicated his life to unraveling these mysteries.
It's amazing how much intricate detail goes into something we often just stroll past. People really underestimate the power of plants.
That they do. Take a look at any flower. It could be something common like a rose or a daisy or something exotic. Underneath the beauty, there's a whole lot of biology going on to make sure that plant can create the next generation.
Absolutely. And it all boils down to this. For a plant species to survive, it has to reproduce. It's as simple and as profound as that.
So true. And there are a couple of ways plants can reproduce. Some plants go the asexual route, like cloning themselves.
Which is super efficient if you want to create a lot of copies of yourself.
Yeah, but it doesn't really allow for much change or adaptation.
Exactly. And that's where sexual reproduction comes in.
Mixing things up, creating variations, just like in the animal kingdom.
Precisely. And in flowering plants, that mixing and matching of genes happens through, well, let's just say it, plant sex.
And it's all orchestrated by those morphological marvels. Our sources call them flowers. I love that.
Flowers are really nature's way of ensuring that plants can get together, so to speak.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are the key players in this plant love story?
Well, you've got the stamen, which is the male organ. It produces pollen.
And pollen is kind of like the plant equivalent of, well.
Exactly. And then there's the pistil, which is the female organ. It has a sticky tip called the stigma. And at the base of the pistil, you have the ovary, which contains ovules, and that's where the seeds will eventually develop.
So to put it simply, the goal is to get the pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the pistil.
You got it. That's the basic idea.
Sounds simple enough, but I'm sure it's way more complicated than that.
You have no idea.
Well, that's what we have this whole deep dive for. So tell me, what are some of the incredible adaptations that have evolved to make sure that happens?
Well, for starters, there's an amazing diversity in pollen grains themselves.
Like what?
Think about it. These tiny grains are carrying the plant's genetic blueprint. So they have to be tough enough to survive, sometimes pretty harsh journeys from one flower to another.
And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, right?
Exactly. Some are smooth and aerodynamic, perfect for catching the wind. Others are sticky or barbed, designed to hitch a ride on a passing pollinator. And get this. Some pollen grains are so durable that they can survive for thousands, even millions of years.
Seriously. Millions of years.
It's true. Scientists have found fossilized pollen grains that have given us incredible insights into past climates and ecosystems.
Wow. Okay, so we've got these tiny time travelers carrying the future of the plant in their, well, not exactly their backpacks.
More like their microscopic suitcases.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So how do those suitcases make their way from flower to flower?
Well, that's where pollination comes in. And this is where things get really fascinating. Plants can't exactly get up and walk around.
Thank goodness for that. Can you imagine?
Right. So they've evolved some pretty ingenious ways to get the job done. Some plants rely on the wind to carry their pollen.
Like those fields of grass we see swaying in the breeze.
Exactly. Their pollen is light and smooth, designed to catch the wind and travel long distances.
And then there are the showier plants, the ones with the big bright flowers, the ones I'm personally drawn to when I see them.
Right, those plants have taken a different approach. They've evolved to attract pollinators, like insects, birds, and even bats.
And they do that by offering them something in return, right?
Exactly. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. The plants provide food in the form of nectar or pollen, and in exchange, the pollinators carry the pollen from flower to flower.
It's like a delicate dance, this interplay between plants and their pollinators. But it's not just about getting any pollen from any flower, right?
You're right. That's a crucial point. Plants have evolved mechanisms to avoid self-pollination.
Because if they're constantly pollinating themselves, they're not really mixing up their genes.
Precisely. It's all about genetic diversity. And plants have some pretty remarkable ways of preventing self-fertilization.
So they've got these strategies to avoid becoming too, shall we say, inbred.
That's a good way to put it. They got these outbreeding devices, as they're called.
Okay, give me an example. How do they do that?
Well, one way is by timing things just right. The pollen might mature at a different time than the stigma, so the plant can't pollinate itself.
Oh, that's clever. Like they've got their own little calendars.
Exactly. It's all perfectly synchronized.
I'm starting to think plants are way smarter than we give them credit for. What else? What are some of their other strategies?
Some plants have separate male and female flowers altogether on the same plant.
Oh, so they're keeping things strictly platonic within their own branches.
Pretty much. And then there's something really amazing called self-incompatibility.
Ooh, that sounds intense. Tell me more.
Basically, the plant has a way of recognizing its own pollen.
Wait, really?
Yep. And if it detects its own pollen, it blocks it from fertilizing the ovule.
Wow, that's some next level self-awareness.
It's all part of nature's grand plan to promote genetic diversity.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's say everything goes according to plan, and a pollen grain from one plant successfully makes it to the stigma of another plant of the same species. What happens then?
Then the real magic begins.
You'd tell.
So the pollen grain lands on the stigma and germinates, sending out a tiny tube.
Kind of like a little root, but microscopic.
Exactly. And that pollen tube grows down through the style, which is like the stalk of the pistil, until it reaches the ovary.
And inside the ovary.
The ovules, remember, that's where egg cells are waiting.
Right. Okay, so the pollen tube reaches the ovule, and that's when fertilization happens.
You got it. But in flowering plants, it's not just any fertilization. They do something called double fertilization.
Double. So twice the fun for the plants. Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me. What makes it double?
So one sperm cell from the pollen fertilizes the egg cell, which develops into the embryo, the baby plant.
Makes sense. That's one fertilization. What about the second?
The other sperm cell fuses with something called polar nuclei in the ovule to form something called endosperm.
Endosperm. The name doesn't ring a bell.
Think of it as the embryo's lunchbox. It's a tissue that provides nutrients to the developing embryo.
Okay, so it's basically packed with all the good stuff the baby plant needs to grow, like a built-in snack pack.
Precisely. And it's something we actually eat ourselves.
Wait, really? We eat endosperm?
All the time. The rice we eat, the wheat that makes our bread, it's all endosperm.
Wow. See, you'd never think about any of this just looking at a bowl of rice. But it all goes back to those intricate processes happening inside flowers.
It's amazing, isn't it? This whole microscopic world that we usually never see.
It is. Okay, so we've got our fertilized egg, our endosperm, all packed and ready to go. What's the next step in our botanical adventure?
Well, that fertilized ovule, it doesn't just stay an ovule forever.
Right. It goes through a pretty amazing transformation. Right?
Exactly. It develops into a seed.
And the ovary, that becomes...
The fruit.
Ah, so that's how we get from flower to fruit. And of course, the fruit often plays a role in seed dispersal.
Absolutely. It might be fleshy and delicious, attracting animals to eat it and spread the seeds.
Or it might have wings or hooks designed to catch the wind or hitch a ride on an animal's fur.
Nature has come up with some really ingenious ways to spread those seeds far and wide.
It really has. But I've always wondered, why don't seeds just sprout as soon as they're formed?
That's a great question. And it leads us to another fascinating aspect of plant reproduction, dormancy.
Dormancy. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale.
It does, doesn't it? But it's crucial for plant survival. Dormancy is like a waiting game for the seed, preventing it from germinating until conditions are just right.
So it's kind of like a safety mechanism, ensuring that the seed doesn't germinate during a drought or a freeze, when its chances of survival are low.
Exactly. It's all about timing.
Wow. Who knew there was so much strategy involved in being a seed? So much more to it than meets the eye. Speaking of amazing plant adaptations, this might be a good time to introduce someone who dedicated his life to unraveling the mysteries of plant reproduction, Panchanan Maheshwari.
Oh, absolutely. Now, there was a true pioneer in the field of plant embryology.
Maheshwari, now there was a name that deserves to be known. What was he like?
Well, Maheshwari was born in India in 1904. And, back then, botany wasn't exactly a hot field, but he had these amazing teachers who really instilled in him this passion for the plant world.
A good teacher can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And Maheshwari, he went on to become a leading figure in plant embryology. He did groundbreaking work on, get this, test tube fertilization.
Test tube fertilization in plants. Now that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It was pretty revolutionary. His research had a huge impact, especially in agriculture. But beyond that, he was also incredibly passionate about education.
That's wonderful.
Oh, he was a firm believer in making science accessible to everyone. He even helped develop high school biology textbooks that were used all over India.
That's amazing. He really wanted to share the wonders of botany with the world. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of amazing plant adaptations today. Anything else up your sleeve before we wrap things up?
There are a couple more things I think are worth mentioning. We talked about self-incompatibility, right? How
Right.
plants avoid pollinating themselves.
Right, to keep their gene pool nice and diverse.
Exactly. But there are some plants that have taken a completely different route, something called apomixis.
Apomixis. Okay, that's a new one. I'm going to need a definition on that.
Basically, it's a way for plants to produce seeds without fertilization. They essentially clone themselves.
So no need for pollen, no need for all that complicated double fertilization business.
Exactly. It's like hitting the copy-paste button on their genes.
That's incredible. What's the advantage of that?
Well, it's super efficient. They don't need to rely on wind or pollinators, so they can reproduce even in environments where that's difficult.
Smart. Any other plant reproduction quirks we should know about?
One more. Polyembryony. It's where you get multiple embryos in a single seed.
So it's like having twins or triplets in the seed world.
Exactly.
Oh.
Think of citrus fruits. Sometimes you'll find those seeds that look kind of fused together. Those are polyembryonic.
Wow, I never knew. So from the intricacies of double fertilization to the mind-boggling adaptations of apomixis and polyembryony, it seems like the world of plant reproduction is full of surprises.
Absolutely. There's still so much we're learning about how plants make more plants and the adaptations they've evolved to thrive in practically every corner of the globe.
It's incredible. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the fascinating world of plant reproduction.
It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you learned something new about the amazing, complex, and often overlooked world of plants. Until next time, keep those questions coming, and remember, there's always something fascinating to discover, even in the most unexpected places.